Hello, Silas here, back with my friend Steven. Say what's up to the peoples.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're all doing well.
We are back for the ninth part of this series that we're talking about, reading the book Marry Him, Settling for the Case for Settling for Mr. Good Enough by Lori
Right.
Gottlieb. And it's just this book about about settling for Mr. Good Enough. It's already there in the title. Steven, tell us a bit about this book.
The book, again, I've introduced it many times now, but it's basically it's a case for reevaluating certain choices and preference you have as far as dating in order to find a better partner and acknowledging that you may be passing up potentially good partners. The book is geared towards women, but I decided to read the book because I liked a lot of what the author said, and I was curious to see if there was anything valuable, but also if there was anything that I could apply in my own life as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And when we started doing the series, Stephen was single, but he's since then found somebody who decided to settle for Mr. Good Enough with Stephen without reading the book. But I'm single right now. I am living in Nairobi, Kenya. I'm just out of the market, not even really attempting to do things. But Stephen at the time was still in the dating market, and now, of course, he's out of it as he's happily in a relationship. But there were some things we'd seen in this book that were very comparative to some of the more sensible things we'd seen being said from the man's side, just
Yeah.
analyzing, actually critically analyzing what's happening with relationships, the different dynamics that are going on, understanding that there's a give and take. There's some things women will have some benefits on. There's some things men will have some benefits on, but then there'll be certain expectations about men that may have run their course, might not necessarily be realistic considering the current year times we're living in. Just as the same thing with women, there's certain things where it's like, yeah, in the past there's certain assurances, certain expectations that maybe you can make an adjustment right now, not just because society is less restrictive and things like that, but just you have more personal liberty. And in the past, there was just not that much choice. It was like kind of set. You're living in a given area. There's probably a handful of people that you can realistically actually partner with. You're not really going to be able to move to many places. You're not really going to have people coming in from other places. You had your life pretty much on some kind of rails. I don't know if you play like a role playing game. There's like the open world, massively multiplayer online role playing games, which is completely sandbox, where you can do whatever you want. That's kind of how we are now. But in the past, it was more like a side scroller game where it's like you have to go on this kind of, you're pretty much walking on a chain, or certain games where it's like more like a tunnel. There's some amazing, beautiful role playing games, but it's like a tunnel where it's like taking you to this one location. You're going to go to that location regardless. You can only move forward. You can hardly even move back in many cases, but you definitely can't go off to the side. And to me, I think this is a good book that actually goes over that. And this is something that I even started noticing when I was a kid, in high school. I think I remember people talking about the princess marriages and things like that. I was kind of wondering, like, why people just want to have they really have thought of their perfect marriage. Oh, we're gonna have a princess wedding. And it was like, if you actually look at how it was to be a princess or a prince, some of these people, they already knew who they were going to marry before the person was born. It's like the mom is
Yeah.
pregnant, the queen is pregnant. It's like, if you're going to have a girl, she's going to marry this person. If you're going to
Yeah.
have a prince, they're going to marry this person. Or that thing changes automatically because of some war or some different situation like that happens. So even with that kind of idea of that's what people were looking for, I was like, there was really a mess up with that. And then you add to that moving to different continents, different cultures, different places, and not necessarily being able to just plug into the different social dynamics that are going on in relationships. I've been very interested in looking into the social dynamics of them, and this is something that I think the book is good at showing. Yeah.
Yeah, I've started listening to this channel that on YouTube. The name is Just Pearly Things. It's a woman. She's been saying a lot of this stuff that the manosphere guys have been saying for a while, and she admits her audience is mostly men, but she's trying to bridge some gaps. Like, she'll have feminists on and debate them on certain things, talk about the pay gap and all that. And I was just listening to a conversation with this feminist about, do we need men? And it was interesting because the feminist kept saying things like, find someone who loves you for you, but then it's like, oh, but I want a high quality guy. But then the thing is, well, if you're going for a high quality guy and he has lots of options, he's going to be picky. So you're going to have to work harder to meet certain standards that he wants. And her attitude was kind of like, well, that's not fair. But it's like, yeah, you can act however you want, but you're not going to get quality men if you act that way. If you push yourself to a higher level, you're more likely to get better men, but you're also going to be competing with a lot of women who want the same man. I mean, that's just the reality of it.
Yeah, and it's not wrong to have standards. That's definitely something we talk about in this book, and we hold personally, and it's also discussed in this book. My general idea is like, look, if you have five, if this is a simplification of it. If you have five things you're looking for, you have a list of five things. Two of them are a must-haves, then one is kind of like, okay, you can give or take, and then the other two you kind of like can just throw away, just added kind of extra type of things. Then expect the person that you're with, that you're going to get, to have at least five things that match those standards as well. Now, it doesn't have to be the five same things, but if you have five, don't be surprised if that person has five. It's kind of unfair to say, oh, you can have five different things of standards, but that person should only just have me for me. I'm the table. No, you're not.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, the table is a flat thing and four legs. That's not five things. I mean, you could actually have standards of the actual table in that kind of situation. And I think that's what's good with this book. It goes through different ways of kind of just analyzing what are the qualities that you have, what are the qualities that you would actually benefit from having in your life versus what are the things that, like, what are the things you need versus what are the things you want. And I think there's a big difference between those two things. You need certain food, you need certain proteins, and we have an entire series where you consume, you can check that out as well, talking about foods. But you need proteins, fats, and carbohydrates to fuel your body. Some less or not. If you're doing like a keto, you can drop the carbs, but you need those definitely things or calories to actually like fuel your body. An average person is about 1,200 to 1,500 a day. I think if you're not moving around that much, if you're moving around more, you need maybe 2,000. If you're like like an athlete, like if it's like a Michael Phelps during his swimming training, he was having like 5,000 calories a day.
Yeah.
But whatever, you need those calories to actually survive. But you want to eat certain cuisine. You want Chinese food. You want a cake. You want some chocolate. Those are things that you want, but you need the actual thing. So I think that's kind of what this book kind of focuses on. And I think the primary focus is women in urban areas primarily, and also who are looking to get with a man primarily to have a monogamous relationship, man and woman. I guess you can still apply this with man and man in some ways, or woman and woman in some ways. Yeah. And I think also in addition to have kids. That's kind of inferred with some of these. She does not completely outright with it, but I think those are the people who this focuses on. So the things that you need if you actually want to have a successful relationship, what are the things that you need? Because I think people are more focused on the things they want that they don't necessarily need to have that strong relationship. And that's why when they get that person that they think they want, it doesn't necessarily work out.
And just to sort of add on to the last point and also just what you said now, with like these high value men, again, we can debate the merits of that term and what defines a high value man, but these celebrities, you know, actors, basketball players, musicians, whoever, you also have to realize it's a supply and demand thing. Like there's one each one of them, and there's only a handful of guys like this overall. There's tons of pretty women that are interested in them. So if you want one of those guys, you have to stand above it. If it's just, I'm pretty and I offer sex, it's like, how many women do they have that'll do that for them? It's like, whereas if you go for a more average guy, he probably gets less attention from women like those guys. But at the same time, okay, he'll be loyal to you because you're a catch for him. So those considerations are worth having.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a bit of our thoughts on it. We can check out the other series before when we have more. The first couple of ones, we went more to just thoughts and things from our personal lives about the books. In this series where we did it, Stephen read the book, and then he's taken some notes and things like that. And then he just reads different excerpts from the book, and then we discuss those excerpts. And we are on, we're in part 3, right?
So part 3 of the book, it's called Making Smarter Choices. And the chapter is chapter 10 called Don't Be Picky, Be Happy.
Okay. So, and this is the 9th part that we're recording of this, because I think some of them we put them together. I think there's one, I think the first recording we did like the intro and like chapter 1 or something like that.
Something like
that,
yeah.
Now, with this one, so we have more talking about that in those other ones. And now I'll just read the actual blurb that's written online with this book. You can find it and read it. And there's a lot of good stuff in here that I think can inform you, whether you're somebody who's actually looking for a man or you're also trying to understand where the people who might be looking for you are actually coming from, because there's a lot of confusion out there for all of us. It's not an easy time to be out there in relationships, because we're just kind of thrown out there into this new freer market with all this options and all this choice. And I don't think the human mind is really quite yet ready, like sociopolitically, for the kind of dynamics that we have.
This next chapter actually gets into what you're saying. It's good.
Okay.
I'm glad you actually said that. So yeah.
Excellent. Okay, this happens a lot. I mean, I think this is why I just like talking to Stephen, but also the content that we get,
Yeah.
like it's in our wheelhouse. Like it seems like often you'll see in the other parts of these, like Stephen will read a part, and I'll bring something up that's like the next reading that he has is discusses that point. Okay, this is what it says. An eye-opening, funny, painful, and always truthful in-depth examination of modern relationships, and a wake-up call for single women about getting real about Mr. Right. You have a fulfilling job, great friends, and the perfect apartment. So what if you haven't found the one just yet? He'll come along someday, right? But what if he doesn't? Or what if Mr. Right had been, well, Mr. Right in front of you, but you passed him by? Nearing 40 and still single, journalist Lori Gottlieb started to wonder, what makes for lasting romantic fulfillment, and are we looking for those qualities when we're dating? Are we too picky about trivial things that don't matter, and not picky enough about the often overlooked things that do? In Marry Him, Gottlieb explores an all too common dilemma, how to reconcile the desires for a happy marriage with a list of must haves and deal breakers so long and complicated that many great guys get misguidedly eliminated. On a quest to find the answer, Gottlieb sets out on her journey in search of love, discovering wisdom, and surprising insights from sociologists and neurobiologists, marital researchers, and behavioral economists. I got the marital right, and then
Uh,
messed up on the economists, on the behavioral economists, as well as single and married men and women of all generations. So
yep.
yeah, as you can see, this is part of why I think this book appeals to Stephen and I and certain people. And this is something that we're not quite sure if this is. I think there's some human behavioral biology part about it, some evo psych in this, where females like the womanhood selects more for certain like more feelings type of things, and then here we're talking about she goes into actual objective things where it's like this actual statistics. We're actually trying to look at why this might be a thing, that's why these dynamics are coming to, what's the actual neurobiology that's working in these things, what are the
Right.
actual successes with the people who have tried out these things. So I think it melds those two things together because you can't leave one without the other, and I think that's also there's a relationship between that. A relationship is about the actual economics of it, because it
Yeah.
is a business relationship, but there's also a difference. It's not just like a friend, because there's that extra aspect of the romance, or the romantic part of it, the love part, the emotional part. So I think it's a good marrying of those two things together.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. So Stephen, lead us off into
Sure.
the stuff for today.
Sure. So I'll point out the first part three actually starts with a quote that's been attributed to Voltaire: "The perfect is the enemy of the good." So here we are. Chapter 10, Don't Be Picky, Be Happy. Here are two actual questions opposed to Slate Magazine's advice columnist. Dear Prudence, I have a dilemma. I've been dating this guy for a little over 2 years. For a while, I thought I should marry him. He's intelligent, ambitious, kind, and we don't fight or argue very often. But there are things about him that make me think we're not meant for each other. I recently moved in with him, bringing with me all my belongings as well as my 2 dogs and 2 cats. I love him, but I don't feel like this is even close to the fairy tale relationship I've always longed for. I guess what I need to know is there such a thing as fairy tale romance? I know I will always be loved and taken care of with him, but is that enough? Would I be settling if I agreed to marry him? My last relationship lasted way too long, 5 years, and I knew we were never going to marry. I just don't want to waste 5 years with another man only to decide it isn't meant to be. Do you think I should talk to him about it? And it says dash wondering. Okay, so then the columnist responds, talk to him and say, what, could you be a little more like say what? Could you be a little more like Prince Charming, quote unquote? Unless you have a concrete idea of what he could do to help your fantasy along, like flowers every Friday or pillow or poems on your pillow, Prudy would not suggest you share with him your desire for a fairy tale romance. The qualities of his that you mentioned, intelligence, ambition, kindness, and a minimum of arguing, would certainly sound like Prince Charming to a boatload of women. And my dear, he even welcomed your livestock when you moved in. As to your question, is there such a thing as fairy tale romance? Prudy would say yes, and in fact, she has had one. Alas, they do not endure. Fairy tales are to romance what fireworks are to the night sky. They are transient states, and while temporarily thrilling, no one builds a life around them. Prudy, historically, it's a columnist. Okay, and then the one other one. Hi, Prudence. After my 8-year-old marriage ended, I spent some time alone, followed by a series of dates with men who looked great on paper, well educated, same taste in movies, books, art, etc. but who were boorish, socially awkward, or downright boring in person. Now here comes Mr. in parentheses quite possibly right, whom I've been seeing for nearly a year. The guy who's kind, appreciative, a great listener, and a fabulous lover. My only persistent qualm is that with him I miss the caliber of intellectual engagement I enjoyed so much with my ex, Mr. QP. Mr. QPR, that means I guess Mr. Quite Possibly Right, is open to attending the museums and performances that interest me, but it's clear that I can't expect any new insights on these experiences from him, and I'll always need to be the one seeking them out. I love my new beau, and I don't want to undervalue his many excellent qualities. But as we reach the 1 year mark, I do worry I'll grow restless in a relationship that doesn't stimulate me intellectually. Am I focusing too much on a minor deficit, or does this sound like trouble waiting to happen? And then it says sign one nagging doubt. So she writes, Dear nagging doubt, I'd have a different answer if you wrote that you had met a man who's kind, appreciative, a great listener, and a brilliant cultural critic, but a total dud in bed. Obviously, you and your former husband could talk about the latest Tom Stoppard until the wee hours, but that didn't keep the relationship from turning sour. You didn't say your new guy is unintelligent, just that he's not interested in the same artistic pursuits that you are. So what? If you want some lively discussion about a play or museum exhibit, invite another couple along to talk about it afterwards after dinner. Or go to a show with a friend who shares your zeal. Probably your beau could write to me that you and he click in so many ways, but all his previous loves have been fabulous skiers and accomplished bird watchers, and he wonders if over the long term he will be dissatisfied settling down with someone who will never match their skills at these pursuits. Wouldn't you want to say, don't throw away what we have because of skiing, but if you want to begin your search to find that so far undiscovered person who suits you in every way, it sounds as if a less picky woman will quickly find that Mr. Quite Possibly Right is perfect. Signed, Prudy. There's more to this section, but I thought I'd let you respond to these two columns before I continue.
Yeah. Again, this is one thing I've been wondering with a lot of people in this book, and also certain things, is hearing women and even men to a lesser extent what the things that they desire from a partner. I just ask, do you not have friends? Because some of these things you can get from friends. Like, you don't have to hang out with you don't have to hang out with your spouse at all times. It's not like, oh, you're marrying this person and moving to a deserted island, and or everybody else in the city disappears and you have to do things with this person. Like Stephen and I, we talk about a wide range of things, but he's not too big into sports. So there's occasionally we'll talk about something with sports things, but I've had a background playing sports. I don't necessarily have any friends that I speak to about sports a lot, but then it's current year, it's current timeline. You can go online. There's like websites, and there's blogs, there's YouTube videos, there's podcasts. Yeah, there's chat rooms. There's all these places where you can go and find that you can just delve into whatever topic you want to and find hundreds and thousands of people normally to talk about those things with and enjoy them. If you're living in a city, there's like meetup type of apps where you can go and you can do these things with them. And I don't really understand. Like my friend Derek, talk about sports sometimes, but it's mostly talking because he's also in the design kind of field. So we'll talk about TV shows and the behind the scenes and making the things like that. But we don't really talk about like food that much, even though he's kind of into food. We should get him on like Dishing a Dish. He's into food as much, but he's definitely not into his food as much as like Stephen and I have the background going talking about these things. So we'll talk. So it's just, you don't have to have everything in one person. I don't understand that. Like, what are your thoughts on that whole aspect?
Well, I agree with you, but also, and I said this in a few previous discussions, but like, I don't get the whole idea of like real life reflecting fairy tales. Like, I mean, you don't have jobs where you only have good days. You don't have friends that you always get along with. Your building isn't perfect to live in all the time. Like, the weather's not good every day. Like, I don't know why you would think a relationship would function that same, like that would be a relationship would be different. I mean, even if you get, like she says, a man, or I guess even a woman that's like a complete catch by most standards, you're not going to get along with them every day. You're not going to see eye to eye. Like, I don't know why people can't accept that.
Yeah, there's an aspect out there of extended the arrested development in that kind of situation, the infantilization of I think womanhood in certain not just developed countries, because even when you look at like certain Middle Eastern places, it's like, oh, the woman can't be out by themselves, it can't be trusted. You kind of look at that same thing like with a child, where it's like, okay, you don't expect to just let a child wander around like unsupervised, because the child could do certain things. If a child accuses somebody of doing something, yeah, you kind of listen to the child, be like, the child could be making up, they could be not knowing. In some societies, like, oh, if a woman says something, we're not quite sure. And then also then you have an inverse where it's like, oh, just believe all women regardless of what they say. It's like, it's really not like dealing with them like as an agent with the capacity to actually like have the full range of human capabilities, which includes lying, which includes being misguided, which includes just having some misinformation about some situation, being actually emotional and believing something that's completely untrue. There's a wide range of things, and I think there is an aspect in there that kind of dehumanizes, or at least lessens female nature, lessens the woman, the idea of what it is to be a woman, and not just talking about like the biologists, like we can't define what a woman is and things like that. But just I think there is something odd going on in that situation where like I don't see like womanhood is under attack, but womanhood seems to be in flux for a significant proportion of the population in the West. They seem to be wondering how to actually define it. There's still a thing like, and I think there's still a thing like man up, because in all these kind of places, there might be some negative ideas of what men are, or there's some kind of things that people demanding from men or from males. This is how the way males have power. Males do this. That might not be accurate, but I think people seem to be more willing to define what it means to be a man, what being a man in society is. Yet with women, they not. It's like, does she really know what she wants? Should we really help? We need to help them. They can't pick the jobs that they have. We need to empower them to go to these jobs. We need to make space for them to do. They can't make their own spaces. It's a weird situation.
Yeah, and it's weird. It's weird too because they'll make generalizations about like, oh, society's holding women back, and they'll be like, oh, women can go into these jobs, why won't they? Oh, well, I know a woman who does. Okay, you're picking exceptions. Like, I always bring up the example in Scandinavia, statistically the most gender egalitarian place on the planet. It's like still more women going into social sciences, men going into STEM. Well, they're conditioned to do that. Where's the conditioning coming from? No answer. It's just like they can't accept that there's just innate differences between us for whatever reason. Yeah.
Yeah, the fairy tale thing is not realistic, and as I mentioned at the start, the whole like princess wedding, the princesses had selected weddings; they didn't really have too much choice in that kind of situation. And now, when it comes to this extra thing, people say, "Oh, I wasn't feeling it." Is romance actually a masculine trait?
I mean, I think the manosphere guys would have some things to say on that about like women loving opportunistically and like men like that whole thing about like men can sleep with and date like who they can, women it's who they want to. So maybe there's something to that, like
I mean more in the sense that being romantic is not necessarily something that when you say okay, a romantic action or somebody behaved in a romantic thing, this is a romantic thing someone would do. When you think of that, most of the things that come to mind is men doing things. So in the sense, like, is it a masculine trait in that the sense that people who are attracted to men and masculine things are attracted to displays of romance, yet people who are attracted to women and feminine things, you don't really factor in displays of romance. Like not too many men are sitting there like, I want a woman to do something romantic for me in order for me to be attracted to them. But a lot of women are like, the man needs to do something romantic to me for me to be attracted to them.
It's funny you should say that because I remember like Christine suggesting like certain places we should go and things like that, and I always laughed at like on our second date she said we should go to the Empire State Building. She's like, honey, let's take a picture on top of the big tall building, very romantic, things like that. But again, it was like it was her, but the thing is she wants to be wooed, she wants to be seen, all that. It's not oh, I'm gonna bring you up here, isn't this romantic? That's I think what you're getting at.
Yeah, it's like, and I think that's it's okay to have a thing where it's like the men are supposed to do this, because you look at birds and things like that, like the birds put on the bird songs. I just saw this thing with like a bison actually just like flipping another bison in like Yellowstone Park, like it just charged it and like flipped it across the road and just like tossed it and things like that. And it's like men are talking about, oh, it's so tough right now. You marry somebody and then they leave you, and then they can go to the courts and they take half in some cases. And I know the suicide rates are kind of high, and that's a sad thing. But just in general, historically, the things and other animals, other mammals especially, they have to do in order to just compete for access to a mate, it's like life or death type of things. So it's a lot less where it's like somebody says something like woman, you have to like go duel them, like, like you have to slap them on the side of the face. Like we don't have to get to that point. It's not really like shotgun marriage is not even a thing, and that was like more recently where it's like, oh, if you found like kissing somebody, you have a shotgun marriage. Like no. That doesn't necessarily happen anymore, but the risks that you actually have to take in order to do that, that's also something that men were considered to need to compete in certain ways, but that's not expected from the women. The birds who are doing like the bird dances and things like that, that is something that they're doing a display in order to get the women to acquiesce or grant them access to that. And then it's like the woman's work who is like now handling like the reproduction, and then she also reciprocates with being more of like the mother, the nurture, and kind of raising the kids in that kind of way. So that whole aspect is definitely positive. It's definitely, I'm okay with that division of labor type of thing, the sexually dimorphic species. But I suggest the women, if you truly find something romantic, go out and say like, oh, I find this romantic. You don't have to say, take me to this place, but just drop hints. Don't just sit there and just pretend like he doesn't do anything romantic. He hasn't really, like he's just supposed to magically know what the heck you actually find romantic. Like just participate in the process and say, can we go to this place? How about we check this place? I like the looks of this place. Oh, there's ways to hint, and there's ways to be more participatory in your own happiness, I think.
Yeah. All right. Let me just finish the section. So, according to a social scientist named Barry Schwartz, there are two kinds of people in the world, maximizers and satisficers, and these two advice-seeking women seem like classic maximizers. In fact, they sound like a lot of single women, including me. This isn't a good thing, especially when it comes to dating. In his eye-opening book, The Paradox of Choice, Why Less is More, Schwartz explains the difference between maximizers and satisficers like this. You want to buy a new sweater, you decide it needs to be well-fitting, stylish, not itchy, a pretty color, and in your price range. It even has to go with a specific outfit. A satisficer walks into a store or two, finds a sweater that meets all of these criteria and buys it. She's done. A maximizer, on the other hand, walks into a store, picks out a sweater that meets all these criteria and thinks, this sweater is nice, but maybe I should look at that cute store down the street. Maybe I can find one I like better. Maybe I can find something on sale. So the maximizer hides the pretty sweater on the bottom of the pile so that nobody else buys it and goes to check out another store or five. Now, you might think the maximizer will end up with a better sweater. After all, she's looked at more possibilities, but that's not necessarily the case. A satisficer isn't looking for the absolute best, but does have standards. The difference is that she stops when she finds something that meets those standards. She wants something stylish, and when she's found it, she doesn't wonder if she can find something more stylish at another store. She wants something in her price range, and she's found it, but she doesn't wonder if she can find a better price range at another store. She wants a flattering fit, but doesn't wonder if she can find something even more flattering. A maximizer, on the other hand, will spend another 3 hours or 3 days looking for the perfect sweater, even though she may not find anything better, leaving her to buy the sweater she'd hid under the pile on the display table, if it's still there, if a satisficer hasn't bought it. But let's say the maximizer does find a slightly cuter sweater or a slightly less expensive one. Will she be happier with her purchase than the satisficer is with hers? Probably not, Schwartz says. That's because a satisficer is content with something great, a maximizer is only content with the best. And since you can never be sure that you got the best, you can't see every sweater in the city, new styles appear every week, and you may like even one of those better, the whole process is fraught with anxiety. Meanwhile, think of all the time and energy you wasted on making this decision, all for something 5% cuter or $10 cheaper that in the long run won't really matter anyway. Instead of having agonized for all that time, you'd be warm and stylish and probably even get a few compliments. But now you put so much effort into finding the perfect sweater, the stakes are even higher for you to have just picked the right one. It's like women who say, I've waited this long for Mr. Right, I'm not going to settle now. The longer you wait, the more you search, the quote-unquote better the sweater or the guy is going to have to be. You don't want to have gone through all that struggle and turmoil only to end up with a quote-unquote good enough sweater or quote-unquote good enough guy, just like the one which you could have had all those years earlier, which is all the more reason to buy the cute enough sweater and choose the good guy the first time around. Okay, thoughts and comments? Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting with that. Like I was that saying that I was thinking about with the duel thing is like, I demand satisfaction. Like when you smack somebody and then you have to duel. And I think there was something about society in the past that selected for satisfiers over like the whole even aspect of being a maximizer. And I think there's a term like this that's in the manosphere that I don't really like either, called spinning plates. Now,
Yep.
I think this is something like Rollo Tomasi has said it. Now, I don't know if he says it as it's women who do this or men do it as well. I think it's also in the PUA kind of people
Yeah, because
sometimes.
there is some there's some crossover in some of those areas. Like Tomasi, I guess would be considered red pill, but then there's like pickup artists, and there's some crossover between them as far as like ways to win
Mhm.
over women. But then with Tomasi, like he's married with kids, and he says like obviously I don't oppose monogamy, but like the pickup artists just are just interested in getting with women. So there is some
Yeah.
crossover, but there's points of divergence too.
And the spinning plates is kind of, it also kind of works in the whole dating thing. Now this is up to different people depending on how you want to deal with your personal life and your personal choices. Where they're like, okay, spinning plates as in you have several people that you're dating at the time you're seeing, several people that you would call and actually go on a date together. Let's say you go for a dinner. So you have one dinner with one person one night. The next night you call somebody with a dinner while you're still talking to that other person, setting up your next date. And you have another person that you're still on the social medias and the apps looking. Your friends like, oh, come meet this other person while you're still actually on working with these 2 dates, having your social media app. So that kind of thing happens now. Now, it's a lot easier for women to do this, I think, just because you have a lot more people asking you to be. So all you have to do is kind of present yourself, sit back in general, and just get a flood of things. And I don't know, not
Yeah.
the people you desire necessarily, but you can take on multiple sorts of things. You can be spin plates. And if you're just average, above average looking in New York City, you could probably go on apps and not pay for dinner for like a week, for like a week straight if you just schedule in even like a month, if you just schedule the things in the right way. But there's that aspect with that. So this is kind of new, even being able to be a maximizer, because I think in the past, the way society was, it was kind of like you knew the smaller groups of people. If somebody was talking to somebody, they were spoken for. Like you're already like, if you actually approach this person when you know they're actually being courted by somebody else, you could fight. You could be your life. The person would come and like kill you. Like, why are you talking to my girl? Like, get in a fight. So there was that kind of situation. And the woman would also now maybe some women dislike that. We're like, oh, I want to be able to have all these options. But some women also like that. Like, I like this guy being protective of me, showing that he can mate. There's sort of like mate guarding type of thing, where it's like, okay, this is my guy or this is my gal.
Yeah.
Like even the woman wouldn't like seeing her man walking down the street with another woman. She'd be like, no,
Yeah.
we're currently in this courtship going on. So I think there's something that has changed, and this is a libertinization, I guess, in some sense, of
Yeah.
the dating market, where you have now these abilities to be a maximizer in that sense. And I think I would be more of a satisfier. I've never really been at the point where I think maybe back in college I had enough people that I was interested, but I don't think I was like really trying to get. I don't know. Yeah, but I don't know how that would work in relationships right now. I know some people would say they'd be okay with it, where it's like as long as it's still just dinner. Maybe if you once you start kissing, if you've kissed, that's okay. But if you're actually like going past kissing, then now you have to be more. But then for some people, it doesn't matter. For some people, they go straight to full on intercourse as long as they haven't said, be my girlfriend, be my boyfriend in this kind of exclusive sense. They'll just be doing that with several people. I don't know the rules of the game. I mean, it changes from person to person. I don't know.
Well, I was gonna say, like, I've always been something of a satisficer, and like my mom has noticed that. Like, even as a kid, I'd go to the mall, I'd be like, okay, I need jeans and a shirt. Okay, this is what I want.
Yeah.
Okay, goodbye. Whereas, like, I've known people like more so. I feel like women, although men do it too, where they'll have to go to multiple stores. They'll be like, ah, this is okay, I didn't love it. Ah, this is okay, I didn't love it. Ah, this wasn't the best. And it's like, at some point, again, like my reasoning has always been if you're spending a certain amount of money, you know roughly what you want. It's like she says,
Mhm.
yeah, there is potentially something better, but it's like, are you going to spend forever searching for the perfect thing when you can get something that's like around there? It doesn't make sense. And I think what you're getting at with the maximizer thing just has to do with the modern era and women and dating apps and social media. Like the idea of a woman can put herself out there, get attention from men from all over the country. Whereas in the past, if you're the most beautiful woman in a small town, you'll likely date other guys in that town. But now, even if you're a moderately attractive woman, you can put yourself out there, you'll get bombarded with attention from guys from all over. If you're a beautiful woman, I mean, forget it. So it's like, there's more of that temptation of like I want the best I can because I have all these options. So I think that plays into it too.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, like they looked at I was okay Cupid or I think it was Tinder actually. They said like 30% of the people on Tinder are married. I'm like, what?
Wow.
Like it's it's kind of crazy with some of
Yeah.
these things. Or they said I think it was only 30% were single women or something. Then most of them were like in relationships or dating or something. And then of course there's a spam accounts and the married people. So it was just a weird mix. And single women and then but that's also counting the men. So I don't know what percentage of it was single men. Probably around 30% as well.
Yeah, I'd have to
Yeah.
look. Yeah. So this next section is called "But is a guy like a sweater?" Okay, a sweater is in a relationship, or whether it's about a sweater or a romantic partner, satisficers tend to be happier in life than maximizers. Satisficers know when they found what they want, even if it's not perfect. Maximizers either keep looking for someone better, never choose anyone, or they choose someone but will always wonder if they could have gotten someone better. They don't understand that not getting 100% of what we want isn't just acceptable, it's normal. When I called Barry Schwartz at Swarthmore College, where he's a professor, he explained the maximizer's predicament like this. You're continuing looking over your shoulder to see if there's something better, and the more you look over your shoulder, the less good you'll end up feeling about your partner or a potential partner, even though he's probably just as good on balance as the people you're looking at. This is why women like those in those Slate column, like women, those women who wrote to Slate's advice columnists, a maximizer can date for years and still not know if she wants to marry him. She has to quote unquote be sure. But Schwartz says it's not that she's quote unquote not sure about how she feels about this person. It's just she's not sure if someone better might come around the bend. After all, will another year after 2 years of dating really provide some crucial new piece of knowledge about her boyfriend, some undiscovered quality he'd been hiding all along? Or will she spend that year in the same state of ambivalence that she spent the whole year before? Instead of wondering, am I happy? Maximizers wonder, is this the best I can do? They experience what Schwartz calls regret in anticipation of making a decision. As he puts it in his book, you'll imagine how you feel if you discover there was a better option available, and that leap of imagination may be all it takes to plunge you into a mire of uncertainty. Okay, thoughts and comments?
Yeah, there's like talking about the economics here, behavioral economics, and economics. Yes, some people think it's mostly they think about financial economics when they hear the term, but economics itself is just about time preferences. It's about dealing with time preferences in
Mm.
a vast range of things. And then there's like the costs of just time and things, the prices that are going on. And yes, sometimes just taking the time to go and window shop at like 3 or 4 more stores, and then you find that it actually isn't a better thing, and you have to come back to that initial store that you had. That could have taken you a couple of days. That could be something like
Yeah.
that. Now, when you're talking about relationships, if you're just holding in a holding pattern like that in a relationship, that's time and time and time that you're waiting. Whereas one thing that might be able to change that thing might maybe some of those questions that you had if you actually married this person and got that extra dedication in that kind of sense, that person might actually open up new vistas and new depths and things like that. But at least knowing that you have your energy focused together, you could actually build something new that you're kind of passing on. And then as the time goes, as you get older and older, the potential partners reduce and things like that. And it becomes a tough kind of situation. So yeah, there's those things to kind of keep in mind when you're doing this maximizer type of activities.
We'll get into it a bit in the next section, but I remember I knew a woman in culinary school like this, and I worked with another woman at my previous job who um, they had like a new boyfriend every week, and each guy was like for sure like the one, and they were gonna end up with him, but then they'd break up, and then the next guy was the same thing, and on and on. And like I was often wondering like what went into this mentality, but when I started reading stuff like this, it started making more sense to me. And I'd say like these women are, perfect examples of maximizers because same thing. It's like, oh, he's good, but like, but is he someone better? And it's also like, yeah, you're enamored with him at first because he's new and exciting, but it's like time passes, he just becomes like another guy. And we'll get into this in the next section. The other thing that I think goes into this is in the modern era, this whole thing about women sleeping around, the whole hoe phase thing, and women having a higher body count. There's the whole science behind women that sleep around more or less likely to pair bond because the chemical bonding process weakens with each guy they sleep with. The oxytocin reduces each time. So a woman who's a virgin on her wedding night is more likely to stay married to her husband because she has a stronger bond to him. Where if she sleeps with 15, 20 guys and gets married, she's likely to run off because there's no connection anymore. Like they've wondered if on some reason this, like on some level, they knew this is why virginity was prized in young women, especially before marriage, because the idea that, okay, she'll be loyal to her husband rather than she'll just constantly be looking for someone better because that mechanism has been ruined. Um, and I also think, too, I think it was Rollo Tomassi who coined the term alpha widows, the women who date or even just sleep with some really good looking, wealthy, or some combination of a guy. And then that becomes their standard. And then they can't date or sleep with anyone below that because it's considered settling. But what they don't realize is that one, you may have just slept with him. He didn't marry you. It's like he was sleeping with other women too. And also it's like, as you're getting older, you're going to have less and less negotiating power. So it's like holding out for another guy like that doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, no, this is why many of these things mix. There's definitely some chemical aspects of it, like, but there's chemical aspects with everything. If you had been somebody who you had one sort of alcohol your whole life, and that's all you drank until you waited until you got married and you had one sort of alcohol on your wedding night, there's a good chance you'll stick to that one sort of alcohol for the rest of your life. But if during college you've been drinking all kinds of different kinds of alcohols and things like that, even if you have one alcohol on your wedding night, you'll still probably be tempted to actually have other alcohols. And then they might be something about your personality already that already predisposes you to wanting more than one source of alcohol. So there might be some things already showing that the person already showed from the break that they didn't really have the mentality or the personality for monogamy. So
Yeah.
the fact that they had multiple partners to begin with already shows that maybe they didn't really put too much choice or thought into actually the action of having intercourse. Maybe it wasn't that important to them. They didn't really pick somebody who. So there's already signals and things like that are showing. But I'm sure there's an aspect of it, just the mentality of the person. And you don't have something as important as reproduction, the sexual intercourse, without having actual what's called without having actual chemical aspects of it, where it's like, yes, if you take a certain drug over and over and over again, you'll build up a resistance to it, and that hit is not going to be as strong that first time, and your body's going to adjust to that. So there's a endorphin hit you get from doing most kind of actions, and if you do them over and over again, you do them. So that whole aspect is in there, and I still think you can get variety. You can try out different things without going all the way. Like, I just don't understand why some people think it has to be intercourse. There's so many other things you can do that are very romantic, that are very sexual, and that have connections, and then you can still keep intercourse from it being primarily with somebody who you would be willing to actually deal with the results of that intercourse. And that intercourse, sexual intercourse, P and V, is supposed to make children, supposed to reproduce. So if you find someone, I think if you try to limit that to that kind of person, or at least to show like this is a possibility, that I think it just forms a better thing. So there's some aspects in there that just select for certain kind of mentalities and the way people approach the world. I think it just matches up. But have they found this pair bonding thing? I've heard it's definitely being told about with women, but have they also found that with men? Like the higher the number of people the man has slept with, the higher chance they actually have to probably sleep around when they're married, or is that not necessarily go true?
I actually haven't heard that explored from a man's perspective. What I've heard with men is that men can have sex without bonding. That's why like it's the whole thing of like a man can sleep around with women and not get attached to them. Whereas like if a man sleeps like if a woman were to sleep with one man and he were to break up with her, it would crush her completely. Whereas a man won't. Like maybe there may be some disappointment, but he won't feel the same way. I don't think the bonding is the same. I'm not sure. I know there was something saying too about how the more sexual partners a person has, the more likely they are to get divorced. And they've shown that like people who are either virgins on their wedding nights or had like one or two partners before like tended to stay married, whereas women who had a string of partners usually initiated divorce. And I think that goes into it because it's a whole like, oh, they're constantly thinking something better is around the corner, and it's like they're trying to trade up as much as they can, but it's like as they get older, it's diminishing returns.
Yeah, this is the thing. I just double check it to make sure it's an actual thing. It's here from like I think like UC Davis. Nevertheless, foreign DNA persisted. It's like having unprotected sex can have legitimate consequences. If you're a female, you may get pregnant, and no matter your biological sex, you are at risk for numerous sexual transmitted infections. Both of these risks can be mitigated through use of contraceptives, but you should fear your partner's DNA persisting inside of you for the rest of your life? No. An article claiming that women's DNA from every sexual partner she's had surfaced a few months ago. We tracked down the original scientific publication and inspired this false claim and spoke to the head researcher, Dr. Lee Nelson. The study titled Male Microchimerism in Women Without Sons: Quantitative assessment and correlation with pregnancy history aim to assess how frequently microchimerism occurs and whether or not a woman's pregnancy history has to do with the likelihood of being a microchimera. And it was just this kind of thing where they were saying, like, if you're a microchimera, then you have, like, you keep some DNA, like, two genetically distinct organisms merge, like in the fetus absorbing its twin or something. So they're talking about just like the woman supposedly leaves some DNA. I mean, the man supposedly leaves some DNA in the woman. And I was thinking, like, okay, there's maybe some aspect of it where, like, the DNA is actually kind of being programmed or a sample somehow, or some knowledge of it, some awareness, like your white blood cells are like with a vaccine, like it gives you some kind of resistance to something. So getting some genes or something is like, if you get pregnant with this person, you know these genes don't deal with these genes like it's an infection, like it's an actual part of your body. So I don't know if there's a thing like that, but it turns out that's not a thing. Some of y'all might have heard it somewhere, but it seems to be kind of questionable. Like the limitations, like sample size and DNA, not foreign cells. So it's I don't know if somebody knows more on that info, I might look for it. Might link it below if I find something with more info on it. But yeah.
All right. Next section. It's called the husband return policy. Some people deal with their fear of buyer's remorse by hedging their bets. They live together so they can decide if they want to fully commit. They buy the proverbial good enough sweater as long as it has a return policy. They may say that living together provides more information about how compatible they are in the long term. We may even say they care so much about having a successful marriage, they want to make sure they do everything they can to make sure it's the right one. But does living together provide such clarity? The Centers for Disease and Control and Prevention puts the divorce rate of people who live together before marriage at 12% higher than those who didn't cohabitate before marriage. And according to a study in 2008 by the sociologist Dan Lichter of Cornell University, divorce rates for women who had lived with more than one man were twice as high as those who hadn't. What's going on here? Schwartz has some theories. He feels that people who live together as a test run might tend to be maximizers. People who want to be sure they're getting quote unquote the best, but then are never truly satisfied. Moreover, the act of having that return policy mentality, if it doesn't work out, we'll move out, might make people less satisfied if they do go on to get married. He told me that about a study cited in his book that found that people are more satisfied with non-returnable items than they are with returnable ones. Almost everybody would rather buy in the store that permits returns than one that does not, he writes. But what we don't realize is that the very option of being allowed to change our minds seems to increase the chances that we will change our minds. When we change our minds about decisions, we are less satisfied with them. But according to Schwartz, when a decision is final, like, say, marriage instead of cohabitation, we engage in a variety of psychological processes that enhance our feelings about the choice we made relative to the alternatives. And I'll let you comment when this is done, but I was thinking what you brought up last time about, like, people who stay in one area and don't leave and they keep rationalizing it to themselves. In other words, the longer you spend being indecisive, thinking that any given guy can be returned for another, the more likely it is you'll focus on his faults and nobody will measure up. One guy might seem great, but compare him to another guy who's smarter but more passive, and both choices start to look slightly less appealing. The first guy seems less smart, the second guy seems less proactive. It's easy to choose between pretty good and completely wrong. It's crazy to constantly choose between two pretty goods. Compared side by side, two pretty goods might start to look like two mediocres. As Schwartz puts it, our powers of interpretation can turn great things into mediocre things. Okay, thoughts and comments?
Yeah, here we just go again with when you have more options, you have more options to compare the thing with. If you've gone to more, if you had, I guess if you've had a wider range of temperatures, then the initial temperature that you thought was hot, you might not be as hot as like that one. Okay, let's say you live in a certain area, and the hottest it ever gets in that area is 70 degrees, and you decide, okay, I'm just going to live in this area. And for me, a hot day, when it's the hottest day possible, is when I do this action. I maybe have a barbecue on the hottest, or I go to the beach on the hottest day ever, or I just lay out in the yard on the hottest day ever in your mind. And then you have the cold beer, and that's like the greatest experience that you have. And then you decide, okay, I'm not quite happy with this. I'd like to check out other places. And you keep going to other places, and eventually you go to like the desert for one day in like the Middle East, and like, holy crap, it's like 100, it's like 104 degrees. And then you sit there out in the desert, find like a patch of grass, and you have like a cold beer there, and like that's like, wow, that's like the greatest cold beer ever. But you can't actually afford to actually move to the Middle East and live there. And then now you go back to your small town, and now it's like 70 degrees, and you still like now at that point you sit out there with your beer. It's just not quite the same anymore because you have that memory of that 104-degree like oasis patch of grass in the middle of the desert in the Middle East, like drinking that beer. Like that's in your mind now there to compare. It hasn't changed the actual initial experience that you had, but your perception, and perception matters a lot. I have an entire series of my blog, rentathon.wordpress.com, of like perception matters. And perception matters a lot versus what the actual X is. You know, like problems don't occur because of what X is, because of how we define X. So if you define this person as not good enough compared to this imaginary person that you might have, or maybe this one person that you experienced for one day of their life, or maybe like 3 months compared to like, oh, these 3 months were so amazing. I wonder what, if I find a guy like the guy I dated in college for 3 months versus this guy that I've dated for 3 years, if I find a guy like that again and have the 3 years with him, how amazing would that be compared to like the 3 years I've had with this person, where we might have had maybe 5 or 6 weeks spread apart these 3 years that were as thrilling as those 3 months as your memory of those 3 months. So that kind of thing is just going to add different things. And it's not just relationships, it's like a wide range of things. Like I mentioned, that example of just sitting with a beer, just those options are going to bring a wide range of things. And I can speak from personal experience from traveling around the world. It does change things where somebody will experience something. I've seen people experience things and I'm like, okay, like I saw that so many times. Like I'm kind of like bored of that. Like somebody will go to like a really amazing really amazing service at a church, or they'll visit some place. It's like, wow, like, you know, you walk in New York and like I'll see in St. Peter's Cathedral. No, there's like, what's
St.
that cathedral
Patrick's.
on St.
St.
Patrick's? Yeah,
Patrick's. Yeah.
it's an amazing church and everything. Like I remember going in and seeing like the people coming in, like, wow. But then I'm remembering the St. Peter's Mass. I had St. Peter's Basilica for Christmas Eve Mass, and like sitting like maybe like 50 meters away from where the Pope was. And so like once I've had that experience, like there's going to be very few churches where I'm like, wow. Like in fact, like for me, like more wow experience of a church is like going to like a village in Kenya and seeing like how they celebrate Christmas there. Now to me, that's more of a wow thing than going to St. Patrick's, because I've seen like the top and then I've seen like, so it's understandable. That one I can definitely get, and I think a lot of other people out there might be able to relate, not necessarily in relationships, because I think there's something about relationships that people put in a different bucket, whereas they have these experiences that they can relate. I had this experience at work, and I can relate it to my friends, and I can relate it in my hobbies, but then they don't relate that same dynamic to relationships for some reason. That's like an entirely different thing. Where it's like, no, that's still interactions. That's still part of your life. Yeah.
Well, I think I've made the example before, but I think about this with workplaces, especially because I worked in restaurants, which were very high turnover, and people constantly move around thinking, oh, there's a better place, there's a better place. But like, I'm kind of at the point where it's like, I realize like every place has its good and bad. Like you go here, you're not going to like this. You go here, you're not going to like that. This is good, this is bad. So it's like, if you're just going to keep jumping around searching for some perfect environment, you're never going to find it. I mean, there were better and worse environments overall, but it's like they're all pretty close. It's not like this place is the absolute worst, this place is the best. It's usually somewhere within that range. And that's the point I think he's making too about with dating. Like Barry Schwartz is like, you may have options, but it's like if you're of a certain range of attractiveness, intelligence, education, you're probably going to get people that are about in that range. Like, yeah, one slightly better, one slightly worse, but it's not like they're not saying settle for some obese bum who lives at home versus a CEO. It's like you're probably going to get people that are about in that range depending on what you have to offer.
Yeah. Yeah, most definitely. It's a good thing, self-knowledge about yourself, and then you'll get a better understanding of like, if you're able to understand your self-knowledge, you can maybe put yourself aside and like, if this was a character in a movie, who would I, like, not even a movie, let's not go to the fantasy, but if this was somebody else that I was seeing in public, that I knew of, who would I expect that person to actually get? Like that's the kind of thing. And I think when people, now, is this something that might be harder? Is this not, again, this is something that might go like cultural wise? It's like men, women. It's like a nurture aspect where women might not be able to, as much as men, to put themselves out of this and see themselves from that kind of third person view where it's like they can, I don't know if this makes sense. They can abstract and see themselves like, if I wasn't me, if I was watching me, would I expect this? Like, do they also look at other women who are like them and think that woman actually deserves more? Because people lie. I think that whole "you go girlfriend," I
Yeah.
don't believe that stuff. Like when people are looking like someone like a Tess Holiday and like, "Oh, you're amazing," I don't really think they think that. I don't think someone really looks at someone like Tess Holiday and then looks at someone like Rihanna and thinks like that's the same kind of person. I don't think they're
Yeah,
like, yeah, they're as hot, they're doing as much. Like Rihanna's like, she's accomplished musician. She's gone through some tough times. She's worked herself up from like Barbados. She had some horrible relationships in the past and things like that. She's multi-billionaire with her the Fenty stuff like that. She's gone around. She's moved around. She's made moves. She's a boss. She's a boss lady. Tess Holliday is just a massive person that eats a whole lot of food and has a pretty face for somebody that size and completely tatted up. I don't think the average woman who would write on Instagram might support both of them, but I think they're realistic enough to understand that Rihanna is a lot more attractive and accomplished than somebody like a Tess Holliday. I don't know.
Yeah. Like I was thinking of, I used to work with this woman. She's like in her early 40s now, and she's one of these like peaked in high school party girls type. Like back in the day, she was really pretty and popular, but just rode the cock carousel, drank all the time, did cocaine, and like was aged a lot. And then when I worked with her, she was in her late 30s. Like again, I think she's early 40s now, and she's talking about like being lonely. And she's like, "Oh, I'm sure some guy will get with me." And I remember this one woman who was the one of the investors' fiancés is like, "You are gorgeous, babe." And I'm just kind of thinking to myself, like, I didn't say anything, but I'm thinking like, it's like. Men are not looking to make 40-year-old ex-party girls their wives. I mean, and it's like, and the thing was, I saw pictures of her. She was very pretty, but she aged a lot because she was partying all the time, blackout drunk every night, sleeping around, cocaine. It's like, that's going to wear you out. I mean, your body isn't designed to handle that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's tough. It's tough. It's tough.
And it's like I don't want to put her down, but it's like I'm not going to tell her, yeah, you're gorgeous, you can have who you want. It's like, come on. I mean, at 40, it's like,
I'm kind of in that situation where I don't necessarily put people down, but one of my ethoses in life is if you don't have anything honest to say, don't say anything.
Yeah.
Like if somebody asks me and I don't really think they look attractive, I don't have to be like, yeah, you don't look attractive, but there's many ways to avoid avoid the question. There's many ways to pivot off and just like walk away, just say nothing. Like that's kind of my inspiration rather than lie to people because people are not helping. It's like a recovering obese person. It wasn't helping if people were like, oh yeah, you just look okay, you look great, like you're gonna be fine. It's like no, you're killing yourself. Like you need to improve your health, like just for yourself and for the other people that care about you. Like it's something you need to do. And I think that whole aspect of just like appreciating reality and appreciating people who show you reality is a positive thing, and be wary of the people who are willing to help you live in fantasy. And that's why we're talking about the fairy tale thing, kind of. No, not the fairy tale. What's the actual realistic actual aspect of it? And that's, I think, a great thing that Dr. Lori Gottlieb has done in this book.
Yeah.
All right, one last thing before you get to the thing. I just skimmed through the article. It's going to be linked below. And yeah, this article, what they're saying was no. I think they were saying no specifically. I think it's only women without sons that have microchimerism. Yet they're saying there's other ways to microchimerism and thing. Like the whole thing of finding women with actual male DNA in it is an actual relatively common thing. And there's many different ways that women can actually get male DNA in them, including having intercourse with men and things like that. Yeah. So.
Sure. All right. So this next section is called "Every 8 Becomes a 6 Over Time." So let's take another look at the woman I mentioned at the beginning of the book, the one who wrote to me and said she wasn't looking for a perfect 10, an 8 would be great. She was, in fact, already dating an 8. Remember her dilemma? But what if I want a different 8? She knows she needs to compromise, but in the back of her mind, she's wondering if she can compromise for something better. Maybe she can. There's certainly a difference between, quote-unquote, being realistic and being with the wrong person. But it's also possible that she was suffering from the problem of too many choices, starting to make all the, quote-unquote, pretty good choices seem less appealing. Or Schwartz told me there's still another possibility. Maybe she was tripped up in a psychological process called adaptation. We get used to things and we take them for granted. It's kind of like how you walk into an air-conditioned room on a really hot day and think air conditioning is the best thing in the world, only to forget it's there an hour later. You get used to it and it's not so wonderful anymore. It's expected. It used to be a 10, now it's a 5. Similarly, for the woman who wanted a different 8, but her 8 may now have become a 6. Any person will look better temporarily. The thing she has to remember is that every 8 becomes a 6 over time. You can trade your 6 for a new 8, but eventually the 8 will become a 6, and you'll be trading in for another 8 too. If, however, you expect the novelty of 8 to morph into the comfort of a 6, you won't be disappointed. And by recognizing that you adapt to any person you choose, picking quote-unquote the best instead of pretty good won't seem as important either. Schwartz's point is that satisficers don't end up with a sweater that's less good than they should have, nor do they pick a guy who's less good than they should have. They're happy because they know good enough is good enough. They realize nothing in life is perfect, not jobs, not friends, not sweaters, and not spouses, so taking the best available option and appreciating it makes sense. All right, thoughts and comments.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, because that satisfies they might have been able to find a they might have been able to find and afford a sweater that was better, but still they have the knowledge for the rest of their life, for the rest of the time possessing that sweater, that they went there and obtained the sweater that they wanted. That's
Yeah.
still there. Like every time you look at that sweater, that's the sweater that you wanted. It still doesn't mean like, oh, this is the sweater I had to settle on. That's the sweater that you wanted. And as we mentioned before, with the example that we're saying, after you've had that sunny day in the oasis in the desert, when you go back, you're like, oh, this is the only thing I can afford. This is my backyard with this beer. Even if you didn't settle for that, like you just get to look at it in a different way, and it's a risk that you take. There's some gambles out there. Not everybody is going to actually find somebody. We're not owed relationships. We're not owed anybody else's time. We're not owed the ability to have kids and pass on our genes. But I think many of us have the ability to do it, but we're the ones keeping ourselves away from doing it because of focusing on different wants versus this. Because the things you need to do it, find somebody willing to have intercourse with you, have intercourse with that person during the time that they're ovulating if you're a man, or have that person have intercourse with you at the time that you're ovulating if you're a female, and then wait for the 9 months, roughly 9 months, have the child, and then find a way to cohabitate enough to raise that child. That's all you really have to do in order to like pass on your genes. That is not really that high of a bar to do it. We've been doing it once we were like still like scrabbling in the earth. Our fellow apes find ways to do it. There's a vast range of doing it. It's not that difficult just to achieve those basic 5 things to pass on your genes, which is the primary reason sexual intercourse is so appealing, is because that's what we've been selected for in order to have the rewards for like doing that action, things like that. So there's all that. That's capable to do. But now when you add that wide range of now the human capabilities and possibilities and things like that, that kind of now will confuse things and keep people away from doing that in a pleasant sort of way. And I think there is an appreciation of that if you think you're satisfied there, with finding somebody who is willing to stay with you. That's a key thing. You're finding somebody who's willing to reproduce with you. That's a key thing. Finding somebody who's willing to parent with you. That's a key thing. If you have those things already, that's a strong basis for you to continue being relatively happy. Where even if you have a breakup, you're not going to be like, I hate this person, I'm going to burn this. You still may be like, okay, this person's with somebody else. We're going to live kind of close together. And I think you see something in we look at Scandinavia, I think they have like very high single parent rates and things like that. Like places like Iceland, I was seeing that. Very high single parent rates, high abortion rates as well. But the single parenthood type of thing, it's like the mom will live here, and then she'll have the father of one of her kids will be living like in the same town or a town across. He might be dating somebody else, but like when they have like a dinner and things, like if it's like some kind of event, some Christmas, like all of them would come over together. Like his parents will even come over. Like his parents would be having a thing. They'll invite the ex over with like the kids and the husband, and like, or it's a lot more cordial, I think. And this is something that we've discussed more in the other parts. But I in no way, shape, and form think like monogamous marriage, man and woman, is the final form that we're going to have of reproductive success and things like that. I think with these new changes and with this new abilities, with this new knowledge, we're going to figure out different things. People might have marriage contracts where it's like, okay, we're married together in order to have this kid be until they're 13, and then from then we can rediscuss and we can go over again on if we have to be together at this point, or we can do these. So then you have certain cultures where they have like multiple wives, and that seems to work as long as it's a choice and aspect. So there might be different things coming in there. Now, of course, when you get into surrogacy, that's going to be a whole different thing. Surrogacy or artificial wombs, when you're going to get the situation where it might be like 5 people come together. It could be 3 males and 2 females. They come together and they say, we're coming in this kind of relationship together where we're going to go in and pick our genes, or go to a sperm bank and pick the genes that we want in order to raise this one kid in the way that we want. And we're going to cohabitate in this household for the first 16 years of this person's life. And then after that, we can go our separate ways. Or even during that time, we can still have like romantic relationships with other people outside of this, but we're focused on this. So there's many different things that I think are going to be developed in that whole sphere of things like that. But this whole ramble for the answer of that section, yeah.
So I was just gonna say, and I thought of the two women here, my friend from culinary school, who is a maximizer, but also didn't seem to understand adaptation, like constantly new boyfriends. It's like, yeah, you meet a guy, he seems like the best thing ever, but it's like that's because he's new and exciting. It's like you get to know him for some time, he becomes boring. You get bored with him, you date another guy, same thing. He's new and exciting. Okay, he gets boring, new one, and on and on. It's like, again, I don't know how she is now. I haven't spoken to her in some time, but if she still has that attitude, I would say that's probably it. Like the I think the woman was conflating the initial attraction and excitement with actual connection. And then when that wears off, oh, this is boring. When in reality, it's like, no, it's just the newcomer's enthusiasm, which always fades in every situation. And then the adaptation I thought about, like with my friend who's like just going for the good looking actor guy, like, oh, he's good looking. And like the thing that like people always say, like my mother has said this too, that like, oh, don't be hung up on looks, looks fade. But I would make the argument that it's not just that looks fade over time. It's that even if the person stays good looking, the effects of the looks wear off on you. That's what the point with adaptation. So if you got with this good looking guy and he stayed the same for like let's say the next 10 years, you're not going to be blown away by his looks every day for 10 years. It's like, yeah, at first you are, but then you see him and then okay, you get to know him better. Maybe there are things you don't like, maybe you get into fights, and then it's like you're not going to like it's not like his good looks are going to motivate you to get through things. It's just, it's an initial bit of excitement, animal lust. It doesn't really mean much.
Yeah, and if you get with somebody because you really like how they anticipate the things they anticipate something that you haven't thought of, they're going to keep doing that. That's probably something that they keep doing, and that will be a different thing every time. That will keep renewing the things. Whereas their the ratio of their face is going to be the same. Like Amber Heard recently, she was found to have like one of the most attractive back in like 2016. She
Yeah.
scored like 98, which out of 100 on like her. There's like a Greek ratio of like attractiveness and things like that, and you can
Yeah.
still see it there even in court when she was sitting there with like the crying and the sort of emotions and whatnot, and knowing all the things about her. There's still something about just her face, like wow, it's still there. So that's still underneath there, and I think those features and those kind of things remain. I think that one thing I find really most attractive physically wise, like eyes, and the eyes normally stay the same in the same way, but then eyes in part is also because they're looking at you, the looks that they give, the thoughts and the things like that, and are also behind that. So I think that's something that will fade, even though it's still there. It will still remind you, but that will always be, it's almost always a reducing thing unless you meet somebody when you're in like high school. Then like for some time they're going to like go up to their peak. Both of you will get to your peak of attractiveness, but you're going to get to a point where it's going to be downhill. But if it's
Yeah.
based off of more emotional, more mental type of things, that normally tends to either keep growing or at least stay the same until you get like Alzheimer's or something, and then there's issues in that. But yeah.
Yeah. All right, so this next section is called toxic maximizers. To be fair, single men can be maximizers too. Who doesn't know a guy who dates a string of seemingly wonderful women, but can't commit to any of them? Schwartz says the problem still isn't these men per se. It's too many women go after these men while overlooking satisficer men who make them happy. Often maximizer women are dating maximizer men only to find them wanting or to have them find us wanting. Two picky people don't make for a great couple. That's often part of the reason it's all that's part of the reason it's often an illusion that if we wait long enough we'll find Mr. Right. The logic would be the people left later on are quote unquote better because they were so discriminating, nobody was good enough so far, but the opposite is probably true. The people who got married younger, who knew how to compromise and negotiate and sustain a marriage, are less demanding than people who felt they couldn't find anyone good enough. They tend to be much better partners and parents. They're probably much more enjoyable to live with over the course of 50 years. All the more reason not to only seek out a satisficer, but to be one yourself. People often think they have to choose between two qualities like looks and intelligence, Schwartz said, but you would probably be happy with someone who has an acceptable degree of both. In other words, nobody's asking you to choose between a guy who's a 3 on looks and an 8 on intelligence and another guy who's an 8 on looks and 3 on intelligence. Most of the time, we're faced with a guy who might be a 6 on looks, 7 on intelligence, but an 8 on lifestyle and personality. Nothing extreme on either end, but overall pretty appealing. Maximizers consider the settling. They have to have a person who's an 8 on everything. Satisficers consider this a good deal. Ironically, it's the maximizers who years later look at the satisficers with their husbands and families and contentment in life and say, I wish I had what she has. Well, it was there for the taking, and the maximizer simply passed it up. After all, satisficing isn't about settling for someone who doesn't have the qualities you're seeking. It's about finding someone who is enough as opposed to someone who is everything. Okay. Thoughts and comments?
Yeah, I think it's a good reminder that often women's choice in relationships in the West, you still are currently the primary person deciding who gets access to intercourse, who gets access to relationships. Now, I would say even to an extent, yes, I know the men have to propose, and normally when it comes to like the final long-term relationships, like marriage, I think that's where men have a lot more of a say in it because you still have to get them to ask. It's a lot easier to get a guy to ask you out to dinner. It's a lot, and then it's a bit harder to get that guy to ask you to be his girlfriend. It's a bit harder to get that guy to introduce you to his family and friends. And then it's like now a bit harder to get that guy to ask you to marry him. But at the same point, it's still the woman who can say yes or no. The woman during that entire time in the West in general, 95% of the time is the one who says the final yes to dating, to intercourse, to returning a phone call, to meeting the parents, to taking the ring, to walking down the aisle. Like it's all those things where there's still the choice in there. So I still think it's positive that they say this. Even like Chris Rock had this one joke where he's like, "Oh, if man could get a woman in a cardboard box, we just all be living in cardboard boxes." Like so much in society is there because like there's an actual drive for men to achieve more in order to gain enough resources to normally like secure enough access to females or improve and get better females from actual resources and things like this. So there is that aspect, and I think that's something that Bear is actually reminding, or Bear is saying and putting out in full, because somebody might be listening to just this part alone and not really have really thought of that concept. And I know there's some people who hear that like, oh no, it's a man's world. Not quite.
No. Well, because I was going to add, I was listening to that channel I was mentioning earlier, and they were talking about that whole thing where women are programmed to want men that other women are interested in. You see this with celebrities, like even celebrities who are average. Like they were saying, like if Jonah Hill was a nobody, like women wouldn't be interested in him. But there's a certain prestige. Plus, they see other women with him, so that causes some attraction. But with men, it's not the same thing. Like, yeah, there can be men who have a thing for heavy women and say Lizzo is hot, but it's like I'm not going to see that and feel attracted to Lizzo because of that, something like that. And then, but I was thinking a lot about this. This related to my last point about the women want the men that a lot of women want, but then the challenge is that a lot of those men have options. That's why they don't settle down. But it's this sort of like catch 22 where it's like they want that guy because he's high quality, but he knows all these women want him. So why is he going to settle down? Because he's just going to play the field. So it's an interesting situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there also is a dynamic like that, and you'll see that when the whole "don't make a hoe a housewife" sort of type of
Yeah.
thing, where a guy will be like, "Oh, I'm attracted to this woman because it's easy to the requirements she has for me to have intercourse with her are not that high," and then you end up falling for that person, and then all of a sudden you start getting jealous when she still has those low standards for all these other guys that she's sleeping with. Then it's like, well, what are you doing? Like you are attracted to that person for the same reason that other people get to be attracted to them. So why are you surprised about this? That's the same thing with the women. If you find something that's general, superfluous, it's not necessarily as significant and specific to your needs, or I don't know, your needs or want to be in this kind of situation. But understand, like, if you find somebody desirable, chances are other people find them desirable. But then that whole thing of like, I don't know. Yeah, that is true. That I think there is one thing that's different where I don't necessarily think men will find a woman more attractive because they hear more men find them attractive. But yeah, because the status is that big of a thing for them, for the men. Yeah.
It also relates to the point I made about just pearly things debating that feminists and like, oh, just be you, find a man who loves you. But then it's like you're probably not going to get as good of a guy with that. But then it's like the guys that you want, they're going to have higher expectations because they have options. So it's like,
Yeah.
you have to accept like you can push yourself to a higher level, stay in shape, focus on your appearance, all that. But at the same time, you're going to be competing with other women who want the same guy. It's like,
Yeah.
All right, so I think this is the last section here. Yeah, it's called
Okay.
Marriage, the Game Show. She asked Steve Martin, demographer at the University of Maryland, why the number of single women is rising in every age category. He said he didn't have the data on why, but he had a personal theory. Many women look at marriage this way. Let's say you have 20 relationships in your life. It's a lot. With every one, you're trying to decide if, say, guy 3 is better than the possibility of the next 17. Some women might go for number 3, but they're always wondering if 4 through 20 might have a better match. Others might pass on 3 and end up with guy 20, but spend an awful lot of time wondering if passing up guy 3 was a mistake. Others will simply stop getting asked out and end up alone. That's the thing about choice. If you don't choose anything, eventually you're left with nothing. I think there's a lot of wistfulness and regret out there, he said. That sure was for me. All that second guessing hadn't helped me to make better dating choices in the past, and it wasn't going to help me make better ones in the future either. There will always be another nice warm sweater in another store, and if there's another thing I knew for sure, it's that I didn't want to freeze to death while searching endlessly for the perfect one. Okay, that's the end of the chapter.
Garen, see if we can find when the highest marriage rate was. Because this is something that I've thought of, again, when they say it's like, okay, the age is going higher, but then there's also just more people. The people are just living longer. Yes, there is a whole arrested development type of thing, but people are living longer. People are more mobile. So there's just certain situations that this kind of changed some things where I'm wondering, like, in the past, was it really that high of a marriage rate? Like, when was actual times where it was like a lot higher? Like, okay,
well,
marriage
my
rate
argument,
countries.
I think I mentioned it before, but my argument is also that you have to factor in that like divorce was less common in the past, which is good and bad because I mean, on the one hand, it's like marriages stayed together and, women weren't just breaking marriages because they were bored or whatever. But at the same time, you did have stories of women trapped in marriages they couldn't get out of and like they would turn to drugs and other things. So it's like you could argue, yeah, they're married, but like, is that really happy and successful? So I think the conversation's a little more nuanced.
Yeah, like I just looked up some stats here. So it says for just countries, marriage rates, countries and compared. Um, I don't know what the date of this thing is. I don't know when the date is, but here we go. So number one is the United States of America with 9.8 per thousand people per year. That's okay. So this is number of marriages per year. So marriages per year. Now this is tricky because this could be also there could be higher level of divorces. So people are getting married. So it could be multiple marriages. Yeah. And part of why I'm saying that is because you look at the states, the highest marriage rates for states, marriages per thousand people. You could probably guess which state has the highest one in the United States of America. And that's Nevada, where Las Vegas is, where a lot of people go there to get married. So you have people coming from other countries. I don't know if they're making sure these are like Americans who are getting married, but I think there's a high rate of marriages that don't really last too long coming out of Nevada. But like now you have a place like Hawaii, and I think that's now coming more like the traditional aspect. There might be some equivalent of shotgun marriages if you found like having a luau with one of those young Hawaiian ladies. I think her family will kind of make sure you get married. Arkansas, Utah now, when they talk about 9.0 marriages per person, per thousand people in Utah, we're also talking about the Mormons, and they have like multiple people. So like, is that counting? So some of these figures are different. So I'm not quite sure, but anyway, so it says people married countries compared. So take these with a grain of salt. Number one is United States. Number two is Russia with 8.9. Number three, Czech Republic, 8.4. Romania, 8.3. Portugal, 7.3. Israel, 7. New Zealand, 7. Australia and Switzerland, 6.9. United Kingdom, 6.8. Bulgaria, 6.7. With Poland as well, and then like Belgium at 6.6. Yeah, so that's at the highest one, and we have like Sweden down here at the total, like the carrying out the bottom ones I was talking about with those Scandinavian countries. Sweden is like 4.7, Finland is 4.8, Ireland is 5. Is Ireland like a very Catholic place? Like, isn't it still Catholic? Or was that Scotland? Is it both? That was Ireland.
No, Ireland's Catholic. Scotland, I want to say, is Presbyterian. Because then the Church of England is in England itself, and then I want to say Scotland's Presbyterian, and then Ireland's because Northern Ireland is Protestant, but then the rest is Catholic.
Yeah, I would have thought they would be higher, but okay. So France is 5.1. So so that's kind of what you're looking at with like marriages not per thousand people. And as mentioned, you can take in those grains of salt type of things with the actual countries, with the actual places. So I don't know. So of course, some of those things are ages, some of those things are the time. More people are. I don't know.
That's what I was saying. I think there's just too many factors, especially with the U.S., because you have different demographics. Like you say, you have like shotgun weddings in Vegas. You have the Mormons with a polygamy. You have like, okay, I mean, no fault divorce. That's like, I don't know. There's just so many things to look at. And I think it was you who mentioned too that a lot of these divorce statistics can be misleading because it's the same people get married and divorced multiple times. So that makes it sound like there's more than they are, where it's like, for every person like that, there's someone who got divorced once, or there's someone who just stayed married to one person. So that kind of skews it too.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's like
some stats you
it's
can
like
score more than once, but some stats you can only score once.
it's like our conversation about income, median versus average income. Like in the
Yeah.
city, it's really high, but if you add up like millionaires and billionaires here versus minimum wage, yeah, that's going to skew it way higher. But if you do median like job by job, it's going to be a lot lower because it's like for every millionaire and billionaire, there's how many guys making minimum wage or slightly above. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, one thing that might be completely brand new with current timeline is you have people in their 50s and the 60s getting married, like in cities, having second marriages or something
yeah,
like that. 'Cause a lot of people, if their wife dies, they'll have a second marriage. That's something that I don't think was as common in the past. Maybe it was as common because like they would need somebody to take on the kids and things like that. Or I think it was definitely more common that in the past there would be somebody who's also like, oh, you have a wife and kids. I have a wife and kids. Or I have a yeah, I have. Oh, I'm a husband. My wife died. I'm a widow. I'm a widower with kids. You're a
yeah.
widow with kids. Let's marry and together. So that'll be together. But I think now there's a higher chance of that person being like, I'm going to get somebody who's brand new, who doesn't even have kids, and then that gets somebody else. I don't know. And then like you talked about with the figures, there's people who get married in their 60s for their first time or their second time just to have the companionship. There might be some incentives of the state or whatnot. Yet in the past, I think if you got past a certain age and you didn't get married, you just never did it. So those higher figures were never really a thing that would be factored in the past. Whereas now people still get married earlier. So even if you just have an addition of 1 million people who in the past would not have gotten married past the age of 50, who now decide to get their first marriages past the age of 50 because it just took some long time to find somebody, that would be something where it would be entirely different. That would already skew the average age of marriage a lot higher, and that's one way we can look at these stats.
Yeah, I feel like I need someone like Wilfred Riley to delve into this because he, I share a lot of his tweets, and he was the one who showed me about like if you're looking at things like crime statistics, affirmative action, things like that. Like he's very good at breaking up the different variables. Like if we're looking at crime statistics, is it like the same age? Are they the same laws? Do they have the same criminal background? All that. With like certain disparities in wealth, it's like again, are we comparing black versus white families from like the same income, same education level, all that, or are we like he's very good at breaking stuff like that down. It's like we need someone to do that level of analysis for this. I feel like, yeah.
we need we need like the people at Mises to release a relationship book. Although maybe Aaron Clary has that book by the numbers. That's like dating by the numbers, and he
Yeah,
really he approaches it from more of like a financial economics kind of place. We're
yeah.
just looking at the numbers, and he breaks down some of these things. So it might be some stuff that might be in there. That might be a book to look into breaking down. I don't know. I don't know, see how long it is, but right now I'm going through like fantasy, kind of dark fantasy magic type of thing. I actually lined up. I'm thinking of getting into like the Warhammer 40K like books. It's like a whole bunch. It's like a long series of books like Space Marines type of stuff. I'm contemplating getting into that, but we'll see if I get into that mess of things. But yeah. So we're at the
Um,
end of this.
that was the end of that chapter. Yeah, so
Okay.
chapter's not too long. Like I said, some of these we may skip because some of it's like about her friends and stuff. Which like, I mean, if you want to really, I'd recommend reading the book yourself. But I mean, it's not that important to this discussion. So.
Yeah. So yeah, that was it for part 9, for the 9th part of this recordings. We'll come back. There's still at least like 5 or 6 more parts. What are you thinking on this section? The third part is the last part of the book. Or is it like part 4?
No, there's more than that. There's like 20 something chapters. It's longer, but like I said, I'm trying to decide which ones I want to skip through because I don't want. I mean, I don't think we would get much out of doing the whole book, but also like there's
Yeah.
some stuff that's not as relevant. So.
Okay. So we'll see. Probably at least 5 more parts or something. I don't know. This is still that. No, wait, no. I'm trying to think. Like, what was our longest series? Was it? I know the fortification. That was like 4. I think the Ivory Tower might have been the longest series that we did.
Yeah, that was because that was chapter by chapter, and each chapter
Yeah,
we had a pretty
we
big
did
discussion.
12 or something like that. With 12 or 13, because there was also the intro and the conclusion, and then there was a separate one on postmodernism. So yeah, I think we did. We did like 14 parts of that one. So 14 or 15 parts. So that was our longest series of one thing. But anyway, as usual, it's been great talking to you, Stephen. If y'all have enjoyed this, guys, gals, and everything in between, thank y'all very much for spending your time to listen to this. Let us know if we're completely off with these things. I know we're having a MANversation about a book that a woman wrote about relationships that involve men and women. So she's also writing at certain things, and maybe some things that you men might have seen and think it's a different thing. Maybe there's some lesbians out there who might be like, oh, this doesn't really work in our sort of dynamics with our relationships, or maybe, oh, this I've seen this work in this different way. We can get a little turnaround, or we can get around by looking at these. So I'm just super interested in seeing what sort of input y'all have had in your relationships. Might help me when I eventually get out there in the market. Steven seems to be solidly in a relationship. I don't think he needs too much of y'all's help out there, but maybe we'll discuss some more other things on these topics and things like that. But yeah, anything else you want to say about this section or the conversation?
No, I think that's good.
Okay, so that's it. Till next time. Goodbye.
Bye bye.